Dear friends, welcome to Banned Business Books Presents, where we talk with professionals from diverse backgrounds and tackle one business question at a time. Today's question is, how do we create value at work? And our guest is Kevin McCabe, a packaging and pricing expert who tells us about the concept of drift in a business and how adding more people to a process doesn't naturally lead to better decisions. It's time to shut down your instant messenger. The information you're waiting for is right here. Kevin, good morning. Welcome to Banned Business Books Presents.
Hi, David. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Yourself?
Good. We're preparing for a big snowstorm, but I'm ready. I'm ready for this.
Yeah, it's not the first one this year, so you have a little practice in that
Right.
regard. Yeah. Well, thanks for taking some time. We're here to talk about the topic of value creation, which I think for a lot of people is really top of mind, and I find that it's a subject that a lot of people will put on their job title or they talk about the fact that they do value creation at work, but I often question to myself, what is value creation? And so you're an expert in the field of value management. You spent a lot of time working in different firms, helping companies create value, and so that's why I asked you to talk today. And I'm really interested to hear your take. But why don't we start out talking about your personal professional history? So, how did you get into this world of managing value, so to speak?
So I got into it originally working for Visa International, and I was a product manager at Visa, where I was in charge of the premium portfolio products at Visa. And as companies were starting to commoditize credit cards, I actually launched a new initiative which resulted in a card called Visa Infinite, which is the premium card. And if you go to Chase Bank right now and their premium cards are mostly Visa Infinite cards.
Oh,
And
that was
based
you.
on that, after I left Visa, I came to Boston and I was talking to a colleague and I was going on and on about how companies destroyed value. And they said, you should go meet with this guy named Tom Nagel, who
Hmm.
had just started a consulting firm in the suburbs of Boston and had written a book
Right, the
called
strategy and
Strategy and
tactics, of
Tactics of Pricing, right?
course.
So I
Yeah.
met with Tom, and he had this small consulting firm he had started, and I didn't know anything about pricing, but I joined them as a result, and I learned everything about the connection of value creation and value capture through the world of strategic pricing group, and I've been at it for 20 years now.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So, so you definitely had the experience of working with one of the foremost figures in the world of price management, and Tom Nagel. That's an amazing experience. And so, tell us a little bit about what you're doing today. So, all these decades of experience have culminated into a project that you're working on now. What are some of the projects that you're working on right now?
So right now I'm working with a software company that where they had grown up over time, $100 million worth of revenue, but they hadn't gone back and looked at their pricing um, and packaging in a long time. We just went through a whole process of actually identifying where they had leaks. I don't know if it's leaks. I don't like use the word leaks anymore. I use the word
Hmm.
drift, where things have silently moved away and misaligned within the company. And
Right.
we went and redid their packaging and pricing. I also just finished up a project with a manufacturing company, $1.5 billion. They make component parts, right? And they also had over time not managed their pricing, and they slowly saw things getting out of misaligned across the company to the point where the sales team were actually increasing the amount of discounting they were doing because they couldn't make sense of the logic of the list prices they were presenting to customers and were constantly getting pushback. And so there was this systemic view of things that were going on where I kept noticing the math was working, right? But the outcomes were not there,
That's
right?
very
And
interesting.
pricing, and it's a moment pricing is where I have learned it is a lens into the company, and the reactions to your pricing and internally and externally are a signal back to the business as how your business model is working and where there might be holes beyond pricing, the prices, right, that are actually causing sort of driving complexity or uncertainty in the type of decisions you're making.
Right. That's very interesting, and you share with me some things you've written about this concept of drift. I I wrote about this concept of something very similar, which I refer to as beating the fade. And so this was a concept that was introduced to me back in previous role, and essentially it means that in a particular product group of a particular category, the gross margin of that category will reduce to zero if companies don't do anything to substantiate value or recreate value.
Right.
And so you're coming with this idea of drift, and what I find is very interesting is, to you, it's a systemic problem around the company that seems to focus itself in a particular point, which could be the price, but you say that by the time the company experiences drift, there's other symptoms that have been happening across the company. So what are some of those other symptoms you think that cause drift to happen?
Right. So the things that you'll notice, and I've seen in companies, other than the prices, let's say you'll see in the prices maybe increase in discounting or a scatter plot of realized prices, not your list prices, what you're actually booking at the end of the day and put as a paid price. What I've seen is also there's decisions start to take longer so instead of raising prices in 6 weeks or less, CEOs, why does it take us so long? I mean, they showed up actually a lot during the last 5 years with tariffs and inflation. Getting a price into market could take 6 to 9 months for a lot of companies, right? There's that. So the decisions take longer. The number of exceptions are increasing, so you're seeing a spreading out of the scatter plot of actually realized prices. People are escalating stuff more often. I've heard this actually CEOs tell me, like, I don't want to see the prices anymore, like this being pricing meetings anymore, and yet the number of exceptions and contracts and things they need to sign off always are being escalating, and they're almost always escalating all the way up to the CEO's office.
Right.
So the confidence overall is eroding around, and it's all eroding in pockets all over the place between this. We're creating a lot of value, product management, and sales going up there where we got to go out and capture the value, and often those things are in a process. It's throw it over the fence, someone else's functionality, but that value creation, value capture are very rarely actually aligned well.
Yeah. And so what I found interesting about something that you wrote recently, Kevin, is that you say, and I'm hearing it now, you say that companies respond with more process. So they respond with governance, so to speak, when they have a value problem. So the drift occurs, as you just said, it shows itself through maybe more discount requests, more requests going up to the higher levels of the organization, maybe more and more time spent on making certain decisions. And so the company can respond by saying, I'm going to put a special focus on these decisions.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that you wrote is that by putting people there, you assume that the outcome is going to be better decisions, right, or better outcomes for the business by increasing that focus. But that's not exactly what happens, is it?
No, and I'm guilty of recommending to companies for years to put in governance models, right? So I thought that was the solution, and so what I've learned is this idea of drift is actually it's hidden. It's a quiet erosion.
Mm-hmm.
that happens in the background. And
Yeah.
I can show you the mathematically of scatter plot of all these decisions and how, how illogical it looks from a math perspective. But what that was not exposing was, and you'll hear this from companies a lot. We need transparency. We need to see into things. We need to, in their pricing, what's happening with pricing. And that's actually that quiet erosion. Leaders will actually very often suspect there's something that's not clear, there's something misaligned, but they don't know where to point. So and if you think about it from a process perspective, that's a logical thing. So you don't know where to point. So let's put some governance in charge of the pricing process or the value creation to the value capture process, which often doesn't exist. So you need to create a process. And I'm guilty of doing this with many, many companies. But it's actually what happens is you put that governance in place. A couple of things I've realized right away is a lot of people who come to that first meeting don't know much about the pricing models. So there's a lack of knowledge there. It imposes controls. So it's kind of saying, well, the sales team is discounting too much. That's the problem. So we got to stop. So we put in controls and we reduce those things, and that'll solve the problem. But in fact, the reality is that it doesn't actually change the logic behind those decisions. It doesn't change. We don't start to learn from what we're seeing from these signals. We're just taking the signals and putting in more controls, and that'll put more constraints on people's behavior. What actually happens is that over time, I've noticed is that solution itself begins to drift away. And
Right.
we have less governance meetings. We have less, we stop paying attention to the signals and stop and just keep going our day to day. But we're not the business is not learning anything from these signals. They're just reacting to the next thing that happens.
Yes. And so you stated, or you wrote rather, that process is not learning. Process improvements are often
Right.
framed as discipline, which is what you're talking about now.
Right.
How can a company get from or get out of this cycle? So imagine you've reacted, or somebody's told you need to put in some stricter governance, some stricter approvals. How can you transform that process into actual learning as a company today?
So, and to be fair, there's nothing, I'm not saying those controls are wrong or governance is wrong. I've actually heard this debate around governance and ownership of pricing within the business a long, long time. The difference is I'm looking at the prices that are realized and the patterns that form from all the transactions that we're doing as signals back to the market that there's something that it's not that there's something amiss within the how we're approaching, you can call it pricing, or how we capture value at the end of the day, or how we're creating value at the end of the day. So the future of this is and to wait, you can think about drift as happening within the business. If you've been around for a while, it's probably already happening. If you're founding a business, you can head this off, right? The drift
Okay.
by actually by by approaching it not as a process but as systems thinking. Now we have a sales team and a pricing team and a product team and a strategy team and marketing and finance, and they're all separately, individually working on something that ultimately will result in a price paid by a customer. And if you think of that as systems thinking, then if something changes in the product, then it probably is going to change some dynamic with the customer segmentation or what customers buy, the value they received. And over time, that relationship may have been perfectly aligned at some point, but it erodes over time. So as soon as we start making product changes, or we enter a new segment of the marketplace, or customer behavior changes, then we have to be taking that as learning signals into the business and saying where and if we should actually make adjustments to some other part of that system, right?
Yeah.
And what's been revealing about looking at it that way is I had the client I mentioned earlier starting recently when we went into packaging and pricing. We started with we needed to redo the packaging. We didn't want to just touch the pricing model. That's where the business started. So that's a good place to start. But when we started doing the workshops, we noticed as we worked through a system thinking that the exchange of value, our billing system, actually had 12 different metrics in it. It was huge, which they knew was there. They suspected was a problem, but in fact, we couldn't figure out which pricing metric to put onto this new packaging model because there were 12 different ones, right?
Oh, right.
And
Yeah.
that led to finding out there was a user group that was only checking the box and not really using a lot of not really engaging with the product very much at all, and other ones that were using it more strategically because we started looking at the user data. So now we had three different segments to approach with three different packages on one pricing metric, and all these connections were made.
That's
So
fascinating.
yeah, so once we exposed one area, we were able to and it was packaging, which so that's working with the product team. We realized that value capture was going to be really difficult here because all these other nodes were not aligned with what we were doing.
Got it. And so that's interesting. As you talk through that, I think about, broader speaking, what are the overall objectives of value creation and value capture? So what's the real way to measure it? What's the best way to measure it? What's the best focus? And I think that perhaps sometimes companies get over focused on a particular KPI
Yeah.
as the objective, and then
Yeah.
that sort of blurs their vision, or they delegate that KPI to certain individuals in the company, and that makes them lose focus on the bigger picture. So for a company to be successful with value capture,
You might be making your KPI, but things may be drifting out underneath that.
right?
It's buried in, it's you could think about it, in the KPI kind of narrows you down to the right KPI, and and what I've always done is what happens if we're just slightly off meeting that KPI? What's the variance that's causing us not to reach that thing? And that exposes, that's a little nit that actually starts to expose things that might be drifting away underneath.
Got it. Got it. So who's responsible for fixing drift?
So I'm working through this with companies right now where I used to talk about governance. I used to put in pricing councils and recommend that thing. What I think is it's actually giving the skills that different teams of the company need to actually manage this. So if you've got and working in a more collaborative world. So instead of having a process, you think about it as systems thinking. So I have a framework where teams get together and start working through. If we were to have a trigger that changed our value proposition, AI comes into place, right? Then are we actually looking at all the other pieces? Is our pricing model aligned? Is our segmentation aligned? Is our commercial model the same today and balanced versus what it was before that trigger? And the answer to that has been very different from company to company. I think there's a greater look, and I don't know what you've seen, but there's a greater move towards learning. Then learning needs to be shared across the company instead of sitting in silos, and that creates that involves collaboration. And the more collaboration there is around the commercial model, that doesn't mean there's someone's right or wrong. Is that everybody's on the same page and understands the dynamics of the commercial model. Then once you've got that alignment in place, and so it's a systems thinking, which means there's multiple people involved. once that's aligned, and we then we know how to respond as a group, and everybody understands how to respond, the responses.
Hmm.
Then yeah. Then that's how you approach it.
Yeah, I think
Does that make sense to you?
well, yeah. So what I'm hearing is that it's understanding the right objectives and getting down to the right KPIs has a lot to do with what you call a systems approach and learning. And what I'm hearing is that the perhaps the value proposition shouldn't be delegated to any one department in a company. Ideally, it might be owned by maybe one person, but the responsibility is shared, or it's understood that there's an overall process, and this is one of the main objectives of the company. I I think when my experience has been that companies tend to solve problems with processes. So I'm aligned with what you're saying there. So, if something's not working right, what we need to do is have a better process around it. And I also think that there's, on the other side of the process, thinking is talent thinking. And I've written about this where you've got certain companies that are more tending to focus on talent solutions, whereas
Mm-hmm.
other ones are focused more on process solutions. I think perhaps in the past, process has been winning out
Yeah.
more and more. So there's more and
Yeah.
more process focused solutions. And I'm wondering if you see any truth to that maybe what you're talking about with a systems approach is more of a talent approach, is more of a human approach rather than having something put down on paper and run through a mechanical process.
I think it's more of a knowledge approach,
Okay.
right? It's actually so we can teach people, give people the skills. Increasingly, it's getting easier and easier to give people skills, and then they apply those skills and they learn. Gained knowledge, and the knowledge is shared, so it doesn't depend on one person. Like I had one client where the knowledge was not shared, and there was a pricing team of one, and then they left.
Right.
And then all the knowledge went with them on that stuff, and pricing quickly degraded across the performance degraded across the company. So
Right.
there, and most of my team people I've worked with on the pricing side, but I can see the same thing on the product side, which is I'm working more and more with product people. If the knowledge, if you create this packaging and pricing, and the knowledge of that the person does it by themselves, and that knowledge leaves, then all the logic that goes with it. I think the knowledge needs to be shared, and that's where this systems thinking. I'm not. I can't make this. I want to make this decision, but I have to have all these nodes in the system aligned, and that'll be more successful in the short term and the long run. The knowledge piece means that I've made the right decision. The shared knowledge means that everybody's aligned, and that alignment creates a long term impact, not just a short term. Uh, at the same time, if you realize that business model and solution life cycles are changing rapidly, increasing, and the life cycles are shortening, and that's actually been been true about prices too. We've this kind of set it and forget it about pricing, which is your value capture piece. That is shrinking too, and so you constantly you almost constantly have to be managing your prices. But when you manage your prices, you're actually managing the value capture piece, and that quickly. And a couple of companies that I've seen, they've been making the right price changes, but slowly what's eroded is they've changed the value proposition with customers, and what's degrading is the ROI or the value for individual customers within their business model. So slowly they see the customer value drifting away while they're doing the right thing with pricing, right? So they're optimizing. You're optimizing it. In my mind, you could be optimizing the wrong value creation model,
Right.
capture model. Yeah.
Got it. So that's probably happening all over the place, I would imagine, in companies today as we
Yeah,
speak. I think a lot of companies are struggling with that.
yeah.
And so I'm curious. I'm curious. You and I have spoken about this before, Kevin. Your your thoughts on how pricing departments are evolving, or what role they should play in the future. Is is there something in the industry that you've seen that makes you think that pricing departments are going at it the wrong way, and that they should do things differently, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I actually, I just recently written about this is that you can't, don't think the pricing department, sometimes they're being asked to solve things that's not, that they didn't create,
Hmm.
right? And I think you probably have seen that. I mean, you go out and talk to the rest of the company and you get a lot of, I don't want to talk about pricing. That's,
Yeah.
and so we're asking pricing functions to solve things problems that they didn't create in the first place, and that gets into, and that this is part of that. And I've run my own pricing department as you have as well, I've worked with upstream with product teams and value creation and saw this. This is years ago. Saw this misalignment. I said to a product manager, your product has changed, immensely. Is it the same product it was 10 years ago? And he was like, oh no, it's nothing close. Then why isn't the pricing changed?
Yeah.
Right? Because the pricing helps position you in the marketplace as to where you want to position competitively and with customers is part of that signal to the customer too, right?
Yes.
And then the signal back is how they react to it. And then so if you're constantly, as this guy Mark was getting, sales keeps coming to me and saying we got to lower the price, lower the price. Well, you creating more value, and they keep asking to lower the price. What's the disconnect here?
Hmm.
And so I think we're asking pricing departments to do things that they're not, the problems they didn't create. But it's a misunderstanding that pricing is the thing that can correct it. It's real, as you've seen, it's really quickly to go and change the price. Well, really easy to change the price,
Yes.
not quickly change the price. But it might, but
Right.
it might not be solving the problem that you're really doing. Yeah,
Yes, there's a bias towards quick wins, I think, in
yeah,
the understanding that people outside of pricing have about pricing, that it's there to sort of create a quick revenue and margin boost, and then perhaps work on other things later. And pricing itself is still a very young profession. I think, it's become professionalized and since maybe the mid '80s, and more prevalent in companies in the '90s, and now there's pricing departments in a lot of companies.
right.
What's interesting is you're saying that maybe some of these projects are set up for failure if they're not taking into consideration the need for the pricing department or pricing leader to have a say in some of these other pieces, like product development, like sales compensation, like some of these things have to happen. But what I think is really interesting is, you know, where does the pricing department go next? How can people that are in the field today understand what they can do if they're in this situation? Like, how can they affect change from where they're sitting? That might be something our listeners would be interested in hearing about.
Yeah, I don't know if I have the answer for that. I don't know what your experience is. I think I've used different techniques to get pricing more exposure for sure, and I've seen companies leadership, you know, react and say, "Wow, I didn't know all this was going on in pricing. I didn't know, I, you know." They don't know the mechanics of pricing, and they don't know all the different analytics that can be done, and um, but but as far as the pricing department, I over time I think it's just been positioned and slowly degrades to like a cost center or price administration. It's, if you think about the last 5 years, how many tariff increases a lot of companies have had to deal with, and inflation and supply chain disruption. I mean, teams have just simply spent time changing the prices and administering prices, had no time left for analytics. And a lot of them may have like a large amount of software and stuff, but they don't, pricing was, I think, was on a projection to go become more professional and more strategic. And then, the tariffs and everything else hit, and they've slowly, that's all they've had time for. So the
Correct.
analytics piece of it. So optimizing prices, willingness to pay has increased, and the noise around that has increased over time, but that's just the price point. That's not, and margin waterfalls have been around since McKinsey started that. Before I started pricing, they wrote that book on pricing waterfalls. But that stuff has been around for a long, long time, and you're a lot of companies still can't produce a waterfall, and so it's really very focused on that price, that list prices, and what the controls should be around discounting. But you're
Yeah.
not solving this. It's a process related thing, and it's not going back to work with the product team and saying what kind of value, what are you changing in your value creation, and does this monetization model or commercial model that still make sense for us today?
Right. Perhaps that's it. I mean, I think that when I hear about new pricing projects starting, I think the objective is optimization. That's what I read between the lines. And so that's not a long-term view. That's more of like rearranging the deck chairs a little bit. But what
Yeah.
you're referring to is more you need to decide which way the ship is going and be on board with that project. One more thing I'd like to ask you about, Kevin, is it seems to me that the some of the tactics and strategies you're talking about, the systems approach, seems like, and then you talk about the price waterfall, which may or may not be very hard to do in your company. Um, it seems like they're universal tools, and I sometimes, at least when I started pricing, I thought, well, it's all universal, it's all pricing, it's all cost and margin and price. But when you get into the profession, you see that you're it's very hard to transfer one set of tools directly over or one process directly over to a company in another segment or even within same industry. And I'm wondering if you've seen the same thing. We see pricing software companies that are sort of nascent but not widespread.
Yeah.
So why is pricing such a hard code to crack? And like, if you're interested in doing something to change your value creation process or system rather, um, where do you start? I think that's my final question. Where do you get started if you and
Yeah.
how can you use these universal tools to to create something in a company that'll help it?
I, it's a tough one, right? Where do you start? It's because I've tried it as a consultant. I've tried it internally and trying to get momentum going. Um, you have to the first you have to expose some kind of um, um, performance gap, which ultimately, in the initial presentation of that, whoever is people become very defensive, defending. I put a scatter plot out saying, hey, look at the patterns of this business, not the individual deals. Look at the patterns that we're, how can we have this pattern of discounting or price realization that's different? And I think the is not not looking at list prices, but realized prices is really important. But immediately someone will get up and defend one dot. I had to do this deal because of this reason, right? And I said, well, that's not. Yeah, but defending the deal is not the same as defending the pattern.
Mhm.
What pattern do we want as a business that results in the performance of the prices and revenue that we put into the business itself? How sustainable is that? And the so um, I think anything that gets into a world of making someone defensive is going to fall apart pretty quickly. and that's where the governance model doesn't work, and we're it's controls and putting constraints and guardrails on the people, as opposed to saying, you know, where I've had the most success and buy-in is cross-functional workshops to talk about a single topic, right? And once you get people starting to talk about the decisions that they're making, and then exposing things that they didn't realize was happening somewhere else along the process towards performance. Then you start saying, oh, then they start saying, oh, I didn't know that was going on. And then that goes back to the transparency piece. There's a lot of decisions being made individually, optimize individual functions, but it doesn't actually optimize the commercial model for the business overall. And I think, and I've come back to like some diagnostic tools that allow people to express the uncertainty or what they suspect there's a problem going on, as opposed to running straight to the data and exploring it. Just simply saying, we're feeding the data back and saying, you know, you guys are out of control, or this is a problem someplace. I don't know how you've done it. That's how I've been going recently, and slowly exposing pieces of the problem.
Yeah, I think there's what you talk about is sort of understanding the gap, but not just the gap, because you can see the gap in the data, but you're talking more about understanding a gap in the habits, the process, how the overall patterns of the
Yeah,
business.
yeah,
And so I can see where you're coming from, because it's kind of it's tempting to look at a scatter plot and say, oh, but these ones, you could have easily remedied that if you'd not allowed them, or you'd had some sort of process in
right,
place. But what's harder is understanding why you're trading in a particular pattern. And I think
right.
that requires a lot of work, and it requires probably speaking to people throughout the value chain, not just within the company, but external. And that's
Yeah,
probably where a lot of companies fall down, is they don't reach out and get the full 360 view of their trading patterns.
yeah.
And so I agree with that.
The project, the packaging and pricing project I talk about, it actually, that reframing the whole thing, where we worked through individual workshops, and we did about 7 or 8 of them. It was 2 months, and we redid the whole thing, and then launched it into marketplace. It didn't take as long, and I think in the past, pricing changes were either really rapid, or anything else was just going to take a long time. But then that long time was based on people's uncertainty around the decisions, as opposed to, or noise in the data, right?
Right.
It didn't change the need. It just changed. It was more of an internal negotiation than a customer negotiation.
Yeah, yeah, and I think what you point out about people getting defensive is very true.
Right.
There's always a reason for everything, and people get very impassioned when they're talking about their decisions with respect to price. It's probably the easiest topic that solicits the widest range of emotion and the most discussion in any
You got
company.
it. Those meetings can get very emotional very quickly when it comes to pricing. It's fascinating from my perspective, but it reinforces the idea that there's quiet drift going on in the business. There's as soon as you put someone into defensive mode, then you've positioned it wrong, and that collaboration piece is just going to drive up faster decisions, better performance, all that stuff, because they're all aligned and they know how the decisions are being made.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think there's a lot of truth to that, Kevin. So I think that's all the questions I have for today. Do you have any questions for me, or any parting thoughts before we close?
Well, so this is a relatively new idea we talked about. You said it resonates with you, but what do you think is the reaction going to be the reaction to something like drift, in terms of actually getting companies to solve, you know? real problems.
I think it comes down to what's measured. So in the big
Yeah.
scheme of things, what gets measured the easiest in a company is revenue and quantity and margin. And so people that can measure their own performance have an advantage over professionals or departments that can measure their own performance have a lot more success, which is why procurement has a baseline, and they can, if they're able to
Yeah.
spend less or spend less on as a proportion, can ring their bell. That's why finance is the gatekeeper of all the data, all the performance data, the key performance data, and they often have a very visible seat. Professions that have less trackable KPIs, less concrete KPIs, often suffer in that regard, such as marketing. So marketing is searching for impressions, which are easier to track these days than they perhaps were 20 years ago. But in general, pricing pricing is unique that it falls sort of one foot in one sense, which we can measure price realization, we can measure the impact of price realization through margin. But they also say that it's both an art and a science, so that's the science piece of pricing. But the art piece is what I call value architecture. So before you get to revenue, before an accountant can actually measure the impact of your decision, there's an architecture out there in the real world which has to do with the messages you're sending about your company to customers and how customers perceive value. And none of that gets measured unless you go out and actively ask the customers how they perceive value, which is a very tricky thing to do with pricing because it's like, what do you want? You want me to pay more? And so
You don't
it's
need to ask that question. Yeah.
so that's the conundrum of creating value. I don't think we have a perfect way of measuring value architecture yet. I think maybe that's where the industry needs to focus
Yeah.
is ideas, is giving more credence to the idea that value should be measured in the present, future, and past tense. And right now we're focused on the past tense of value, or sometimes the present, but we're never thinking about our future value. And if I make this decision, if I add this to this attribute to a product today or a service today, how will it create value in the future?
Right.
And is that the game I want to play? So I wish I had better examples of it working in practice, but I think that's where we need to go.
Yeah, measuring future value, I think a lot of in the research world, when I started in conjoint analysis and stuff like that, there was, customers don't know the value because the product hasn't been presented yet, right? They don't, right? Tom Nagel and strategic pricing group, we never believed any of that. We actually, if you're impacting, some of it is perception, right? But a lot of it is if your revenue increases, cost decreases, focusing on things that actually change the economics of your customer's business, then those are measurable value. And a lot of those things don't actually, if you find the right value drivers, they always exist in the future. How much value you create will be different from one customer to another. But those things tend not to change. And at one point it was more like this, but the criteria by which customers made purchases didn't change very frequently. So they don't change as frequently as we think. So how companies make purchase decisions outside of major trigger events inside the customer's business, those decisions tend to last longer than. And oftentimes it's not as much, price is not as weighed as heavily as most of our internal assumptions are.
Right.
So if you can measure track the value drivers over time, then you can figure out whether you're actually creating value over.
Right. Right. Price comes up
Then
as
only focus on when things are significantly changed.
right. Well, price is interesting, but it comes up as the thing that we think we ought to change because it's the easiest way to communicate back to the company that you're dissatisfied with one of the other value drivers and the value you're getting from what you're paying.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the whole value architecture thing is still it still needs to be defined, and maybe product teams need to be looking at this information more frequently than they do, right? As opposed to just creating another feature. Yeah.
correct, correct. I think that if you wanna really create and capture value, you start with the product development, the new product initiative cycle, and that's your opportunity. Once it's trading, then you've created a benchmark
Right.
in the space of your consumer's head for a very long time. So that's where people should really be thinking about it long term. I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Chasing that instead of chasing the perfect price. Yeah.
Got it. Well, Kevin, I think that's
Yeah.
a really great way to end our conversation. Good thoughts, and I really appreciate you joining us. It's been a super interesting conversation from my side. I've definitely taken away a lot from it. So again, thank you, and hope to connect with you sometime again
Yeah.
soon.
David, thank you, and thanks for your interest in what I'm working on. I appreciate it deeply.
Oh, you're very welcome.